Detailed overview of environmental degradation. Introduction. Environmental degradation refers to the deterioration of the natural environment through the depletion of resource, pollution, and destruction of ecosystems, primarily driven by human activities. It undermines the Earth's capability of sustain life, affecting air, water, soil, and biodiversity. With global population growth, industrialization, and unsustainable practices, environmental degradation has accelerated, contributing to climate change, loss of biodiversity, and threats to human well being. These documents provide a detailed exploration of the causes, types, impacts, and mitigation strategies for environmental degradation. Causes and environmental degradation. Environmental degradation results from a combination of human induced and natural factors, with anthropogenic activities being the dominant cause. Deforestation, clearing forest for agriculture, logging, and urbanization destroys habitat and releases stored carbon. Global forest loss reached 11% from 1990 to 2020. Pollution, emissions of greenhouse gases, toxic chemicals, and vastly polluted air, water, and soil. Industrial activities release 36 billion tons of carbon dioxide annually, and 8 million tons of plastic enters ocean yearly. Over exploitation of resource, unsustainable extraction of water, minerals, and fisheries de- depletes ecosystem. Overfishing has reduced 34% of global fish stocks to unsustainable levels. Urbanization and land use changes. Expanding cities and infrastructure degrade soil and disrupt ecosystem. Urban areas grew by 85% globally from 1975 to 2015. Agriculture, intensive farming practices including pesticides use and monoculture degrades soil and pollute water. Agriculture consumes 70% of global freshwater and contributes 30% of GHG emissions. Climate change, rising temperature driven by GHG emissions exacerbate degradation through extreme weather and sea level rise. Global warming has raised 1.2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Natural factors, volcanic eruptions and wildfires contribute minimally but can exacerbate human-induced degradation in specific regions. Types of environmental degradation. Environmental degradation manifests in various forms, each affecting different components of Earth system. Land degradation, soil erosion, desertification, and salinization reduce arable land globally. 24% of land, 1.5 billion hectares, in degraded, affecting 1.5 billion people. Water degradation, pollution from industrial effluents, agricultural runoff, and plastics contaminates freshwater and marine ecosystem. Over 80% of wastewater in discharge untreated. Air pollution, emissions of particulate matter, ozone, and GHGs degrade air quality. Air pollution causes 7 million premature deaths annually. biodiversity loss, habitat destruction and pollution threaten species. 1 million species face extinction with 25% of assessed species as risk. Ocean degradation, acidification, 30% increases in ocean acidity since 1750, and overfishing harm marine ecosystem. Coral reefs have declined by 50% since the 1950s. Impact on environmental degradation. Environmental degradation has profound effects across multiple domains. Environmental impacts: ecosystem collapse, loss of biodiversity disrupts food chain and ecosystem service such as pollination, which supports 75% of global crops. Climate feedback loops, deforestation and soil degradation release stored carbon, amplifying global warming. uh, Permafrost throwing could release 1400 GTC by 2100. Resource depletion, overexploitation reduce freshwater and soil fertility, threatening food security. Soil impacts, health risk, air and water pollution increase respiratory disease, cancers and waterborne illnesses. Contaminated water cause 1.8 million deaths annually. Displacement, degradation and climate impacts could displace 1.2 billion people by 2050, particularly in low-lying and arid regions. Food insecurity, soil degradation and water scarcity reduce crop yields by up to 20% in vulnerable regions. Economic impact, agricultural losses, land degradation reduce global agricultural productivity, costing $40 billion annually. Infrastructure damage, extreme weather and sea level rise threaten $1 trillion in coastal asset by 2050. Economic burden, environmental degradation could reduce global GDP by 1018% by 2050 if unaddressed. Mitigation and management strategies. Addressing environmental degradation requires coordinated global and local efforts. Key strategies include sustainable land management, reforestation, agroforestry, and soil conservation can restore 700 million hectares of degraded land by 2030. Pollination control, enforcing stricter regulations on emissions and waste, such as the EU's 2021 single-use plastic ban, reduce environmental contamination. Renewable energy transition, replacing fossil fuels with solar, wind, and geothermal energy cut GHG emissions. Renewable supplied 29% of global electricity in 2023. Conservation and restoration, protecting ecosystem and restoring wetlands, forest and coral reefs, preserves biodiversity. Restoration could sequester 7 billion tons of carbon dioxide annually. Sustainable agriculture, precision farming, organic fertilizer and crop rotation reduce soil and water degradation. Water management, efficient irrigation, wastewater treatment and watershed protection ensure water security. Treated wastewater reuse could meet 10% of global water demand by 2030. Global policy frameworks. Agreements like the Paris Agreement and UN Sustainable Development Goals (SDGs) guide collective action. Climate finance of $100 billion annually support vulnerable nations. Public awareness and education. Promoting sustainable practices and circular economy principle encourage community participation. Challenge in addressing environmental degradation. Disabled progress. Several challenges hinder efforts to combat environmental degradation. Economic constraints. Mitigation requires $4.5 trillion annually by 2030, a challenge for low income countries. Political resistance. Fossil fuel industries and short term economics priorities delay policies implementation in some regions. Global inequities. High income nations responsible for 50% of historical emissions face less immediate harm than developing nations, which contribute 3% but suffer disproportionately. Lack of awareness, limited public understanding the sustainable practices hinders adaptation of solutions like waste reduction and design. Linkage to climate change. Environmental degradation amplifies climate change and vice versa. Deforestation and soil degradation release carbon, contributing to the 1.2 degree Celsius warming observed since 1880. Conversely, climate driven events like droughts and floods exacerbate land and water degradation. Methane emissions from industry and agriculture. 15.5% of US methane in 2021 further accelerate warming. Addressing degradation through sustainable practices is critical for climate mitigation and adaptations. Conclusion. Environmental degradation threatens ecosystem, human health and global economies, with 24% of land degraded and 1 million species at risk, driven by human activities like deforestation, pollution, and overexploitation. It requires urgent action through sustainable practices, policy enforcement, and global cooperation. By prioritizing restoration, renewable energy, and equitable solutions, humanity can mitigate degradation and build a resilient, sustainable future.